Hello, welcome to Funny Money. My name is Andrés Bernal, a professor at the City University of New York in policy and urban studies and a political advisor. And I'm here with my co-host, Jessica, also known as Ka.
Hello, I'm Burbank. I'm an economic policy analyst. I'm also a political commentator on TV and stuff, and I make TikToks in funny hats. And this is a podcast that's about the economy, how it works, and how we think it can work better.
So most people, they go through their lives, they go through school, their education, and they don't learn a lot about the economy and economics. And then when they do, the education kind of sucks, and people just believe a number of assumptions and perspectives and frameworks as fact, when in reality, they're pretty hotly debated.
And I don't think it's right, and I believe I speak for Andres as well, that we don't teach economics in K through 12 education. And I think everybody, if we have to live in and participate and work in this system for most of our waking hours, most of our lives, we have a right to know about how it works and who's making decisions on it and why they're making those decisions. And so we're going to explore a little bit about that. And to start this off, there's two wolves inside of you, and Andres will tell you about them.
Two wolves that live inside of us. So I think that's a great metaphor for a really, I think, important distinction when you think about the economy and economics and what we learn and what we don't learn. The vast majority of schools, when they talk about economics, they operate from what's referred to as the orthodoxy or orthodox economics, also known as the mainstream, sometimes referred to as neoclassical economics, but really it's based on a certain number of assumptions. Like, for example, the idea that the entire economy begins at the individual in kind of like this separate world. And this individual is trying to maximize their self-interest. And so in doing so, they encounter other individuals and everybody tries to maximize their self-interest and trade. And when they do, this creates markets, this creates these things called prices or price signals, and it aggregates up into the way we think things work. And that's really the way a lot of, actually most economists operate. And it tries to be non-political. It sees itself as like a science that's independent of any kind of social norms or political goals or anything like that. And this is very different from the what's called the heterodox approach or heterodox economics, which basically is a number of different perspectives in schools. But what they have in common is that they begin with the economy as this social process instead. So instead of like a bunch of separate individuals all coming together, it starts with a social process itself. And that social process has different institutions, different norms, different goals, power is involved. And that's quite different from the way that a lot of economists think about. So it's a really important kind of difference in how we see the world and talk about this stuff.
And now we will show you the cube. The cube is a very important image that Andres created. You want to tell them why you created the cube. And for our listeners who are not getting the visual, it's just a bunch of old white guys. That's all it is. It's a nice collage of old white guys, really.
Yeah, so I was on Twitter one day and I was really frustrated because to give a little bit more context into the Twitter drama about economics, a lot of these mainstream economists just dismiss any other perspective, and I created this cube to kind of show some of the leading figures and voices that see themselves as these experts, which I think like in today's era, they could be understood as almost like priests of a lot of the fundamentalism about how we think the world works. And as you can see in my cube, there's not a lot of diversity in the field of economics either. And it's pretty much like a quite a closed space. And it's very difficult even to get your research out or get heard if you don't belong to this like little club, as George Carlin used to say. So, I created this cube to kind of emphasize like the crisis that exists right now in the field, and the need and the importance to have different perspectives out there.
To say that the orthodox view, they frame their analysis of economics and their teaching of economics as non-political, apolitical. It is a political decision to say that a good economy is one where people are unemployed, and where our measure of success is how much revenue and dollars we're bringing in, rather than are people meeting their basic needs? Are they meeting their material needs? And for me, the difference between these two wolves is like the orthodox view is very business centered, and the heterodox view is really looking at, how is society doing? How are people doing? Are they doing well? Are they meeting their needs? Are we achieving things as a society? And that's not really a bias, because I'm someone who learned economics through first learning the orthodox view, which is basically like law in a lot of American colleges and institutions and universities. That's like mostly the economics you get taught, and you're really lucky if you get the heterodox view. But to understand the orthodox view, the classical finance bro type view of economics, that's really useful to dismantle it. But the main difference for me, and why the wolf that won the fight within me is the heterodox wolf, is because they don't take the system itself for granted. That was the problem I had with learning orthodox economics. It's just, this is the economic system we have. Everything else is we're learning how to operate within that existing system. Why are we not proposing some changes to the system? And there's a lot of power dynamics that go into that I think we'll get into. But a lot of economists on both sides actually don't talk too much about monetary and fiscal policy, and that's really important and really necessary for, I think, everybody to know about. So we'll be talking about that a lot in the podcast. Finance bros definitely are not people who have a background on that. So we want to fill in some of those blanks. Andres, you want to tell the people some other stuff we'll be discussing on this podcast?
Yeah. So, our goal is really to unpack a lot of these alternative or heterodox perspectives and make them accessible to everybody, to give tools for, people doing some great work, whether you're just a concerned person in our different communities, or you're an organizer, or you're working for an institution, whatever the case may be, right? So much of economics is presented as this like super technical, impossible to understand thing that only certain experts can know about and speak about. And so what we really want to do here is unpack a different way of thinking about things that has just a tremendous amount of research and really solid perspective. So one really important topic, I think, is understanding the role of history, institutions, and culture. And that's something that's like very ignored. If you ask somebody that like studied economics at a mainstream university, they will never take a history of economic thought class, for example, right? And the last few hundred years are just riddled with debates, with certain sides that win, with decisions and events that happen that kind of leave a groundwork for the future. So the way the past affects the future is a big role in thinking about the economy. The way that people's expectations about the future affects the present. All of that plays a really big role as well. When we think about institutions, like everything from the family to labor unions to firms and companies and corporations, to the legal decisions that shape and create all of these things and create like the nuances around them, and the different debates there, to culture, which is, how do we define what's valuable? How do we set goals for ourselves as a society? How do we exclude some people and include others? How does this show up, like in terms of our different gender experiences and different racial and ethnic experiences, and the inequalities that might come about from some of these things? So all of this is really important, not as something totally separate from the economy, but as something that the economy is actually deeply embedded in. Ka, what's another one?
All right, I'm going to try and blow everybody's mind in under a minute, hopefully. So, I love this explanation of where money comes from because so many of us are told this false story that one person was fishing, one person was, chopping wood. And for them to trade, it would have to require the person has fish while the other person has wood. And that's the founding of the economy because sometimes the person who had fish, the other person didn't have wood. So they're like, let's use seashells or something pretty as a medium of exchange. Time goes on, and that medium of exchange turns to gold. And then goldsmiths have some practice keeping gold secure. So everybody that's walking around with all this stuff, they're like, this is a liability. They actually say, hey, Mr. Goldsmith, you have this great safe. Let me store it with you. And the goldsmith would give you a receipt so you can go back and give the gold. And then people said, oh, well, we can actually trade these receipts instead. Thus, currency was developed. The goldsmith decided, oh, well, not everybody's going to come get their gold at the same time, so I'm going to only keep a fraction of it here. And then the goldsmith became our modern day banks. That's like not at all how it happened. And the founding of money is actually a little bit different and a little bit more complicated than that. And hopefully we'll get to explore that in an episode very soon. But that idea being false tells us a lot about how our monetary system actually works. So the government is the currency issuer. They create the dollars that we all use. And this idea that government spending is money that they'll have to pay back to someone is not at all true. The government doesn't work like a household. So if I spend money that I don't have, I just create it. I don't have that power. I have to go to a bank and say, hey, I need some money that I don't have right now. I have a loan. I have to pay it back with interest. The government having the power of being a currency issuer means it doesn't operate like a household. And so that means we have a whole world of opportunity when it comes to how the government decides to use this amazing power of money creation. There's a huge potential in how we can live in a much better society when we actually have our democratic institution used to manage public programs and public spending and pass some really ambitious fiscal policy instead of saying banks get to decide, who gets to take out loans and when new money enters the economy. So that's one of the things that I think we'll talk about a lot because it's a complicated topic and you might not understand it the first time you hear about it. So that's a conversation we'll have again and again.
Yeah, that's so key, Jess, because as you're describing that, it just makes me think about the role of all these different mythologies in what we think is possible and how we set expectations for our political leaders and things like that. And so, the money myth plays such a huge role in that. And in orthodox economics, the idea that because only individuals trading are the foundation of everything, money is the secondary thing that's always scarce. And I think that's really important, and especially important for something I'm very passionate about, and I know you are as well, and that's environmental policy and the idea of a Green New Deal, or this effort, this framework for trying to meet the goals of the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, and keep the planet from warming beyond these very terrible levels, and having to transform our economy and our society in order to do that. So what does that entail? How do we massively invest in redesigning the way our transportation and our housing and our food work? How do we employ people similar to how they did during the first New Deal in an inclusive way? Topics like the just transition, so that when we do this, the people that were working in the oil fields or in the fossil fuel industry, that they don't just get left out, that they are still part and included in this transition to a new energy system. Same with a lot of the what's called frontline communities, or people that have been affected kind of disproportionately by pollution and climate change and waste and all of these terrible things, right? And part of this Green New Deal framework is the job guarantee idea and agenda, which sets to basically make the opportunity to work at a living wage a fundamental right, just like healthcare and housing and all these other things. It has a lot of roots in the civil rights movement, and there's some great scholars and organizers that are pushing for a federal job guarantee. So we'll be talking about that as well, especially as it relates to transforming our economy and winning a Green New Deal, as they say.
Andres's TED Talk is also on the Green New Deal, so check that out. Um, I'm gonna plug your TED Talk for you time and again. But okay, I love that you talked about this being a very functional policy solution, because that's missing from so many conversations in economics, in public policy. It's like, we have to end this terribly destructive thing, like we're using all of this oil, but it is a problem that our energy dependency is on fossil fuels. There need to be real steps to change that so that it's not a big disruption. I think a lot of our ideas of big systemic change, we're like, well, we're going to have to burn it all down and then start something new. And I think this new approach to economics, that we both approach what we're talking about, economics and public policy from, it's providing stepping stones to avoid that disruption, but still create that like better world that we all want to live in. So this big, bold thinking, I think, is missing from a lot of the conversations that we hear, like elected officials and people running for office, when they talk about policy changes. You're not getting a lot of good stuff. So those ideas oftentimes, sadly, live and die in universities. So I'm glad that we get to bring them out of those. And it's possible to invest in things like the Green New Deal without causing runaway inflation. The government can print as many dollars as they want. No, I'm just kidding. They can't. But they do have the power to spend money on things. Think about the return on investment of investing in something like renewable energy. Now you have energy for many, many years. And let's remember that wind turbines pay for themselves after 10 years or so, depending on the capacity of the wind turbine. There's a lot of different kinds I've learned. But that's huge, right? The return on investment is really important. And when we talk about public spending, we need to think about what real productive resources are we putting to use to make our economy as a whole more productive and produce things that we really value. Our concern when we are spending is, are we putting dollars out there that aren't being put to good use? Are we putting dollars into the economy when maybe everybody is already employed and we're not going to be able to pay anybody to be productive? Maybe our tools and machinery and land is all in use. And if we put dollars towards this sector, there's going to be extra money out there in the economy. So the constraint with spending should be looking at the real economy, not some made up numbers that Jerome Powell has when he's like, oh, we've got to raise some interest rates more because we think that when unemployment's at this number, inflation will go up, because that means more people will have jobs, and therefore, they're going to have more money to spend into the economy, and they can easily leave their job for a new job, which means now you get to demand better pay from your boss. And now there's even more money, and there's this demand problem. More people are buying goods, and that means prices have to go up. The thing about that is that's orthodox economics, right? This supply and demand perspective, this idea that when unemployment's at a certain level, inflation becomes a problem. That's really only helping business owners, right? They want to keep wages low. They don't want to pay workers more. It's not actually a supply and demand problem, because if more people are working, they're producing more. And so there's all of these false narratives we have that have really real consequences, as we've seen with this recent influx of interest rate hike after interest rate hike, month after month. And so that's something that we'll unpack in more detail, and something that I think you've heard me talk about before. But let's talk more about the actual day-to-day of the podcast. Enough about the big ideas. Where can you find us?
Yeah, so I'm so excited for everything we're going to cover. We just kind of gave you all a short little glimpse and outline, but from all of that, there's so much to unpack, and we're going to bring in some really fantastic and brilliant guests. So the format of the podcast, or the show, is going to be we're going to go live on Wednesdays, every other Wednesday, on YouTube and Twitch. And then we're going to release those episodes on the following Friday for everybody to be able to listen to on Spotify and the other podcast platforms. So that's the kind of idea. We're going to bring in different guests. We're going to spend some time kind of setting up some context, bantering a bit here and there, bring on the guests, talk to them, and then take it from there.
So Funny Money Friday. I mean, come live Wednesday. It'll be fun. Everybody's going to have fun. Everybody's going to have a good time. But also, if you want to listen to it on your way to work on Friday, Funny Money Fridays, I think will be great. And the guests are going to be so based and sexy and cool. And one of them, our first one, is a big one
It's
of
a
my
big one.
personal heroes.
Yes. So if any of you all follow us, you probably notice that a lot of what we've been talking about here has been from the perspective of modern monetary theory, which is so hot right now, right? Everybody's talking about it.
Those
Some people
communists
hate
just
it.
want to print more money.
Money printer go burr. We're leaning in hard on that, and we are bringing you the person. The book is backwards.
I knew
So
that.
we will bring you, we're going to be speaking to the author of The Deficit Myth, none other than Stephanie Kelton herself. We're going to try to make some sense of a lot of what's going on with this bank stuff, this funny money bank stuff, and what we can really use and gain from a different understanding of fiscal policy and our capacity to spend money, as Ka was just alluding to, which is all really powerful and important. It's a huge paradigm shift. So I'm really excited. We're going to bring in Stephanie. It's going to be fantastic. So make sure that you stay tuned for that.
I've said it before, I'll say it again. People tell you don't meet your heroes. The full quote is don't meet your heroes unless it's Stephanie Kelton. She's
That's
great.
right.
She's a good time. I know, she's an economist and blah, 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 but she is not a robot. She speaks in a way that's very accessible. You don't need a knowledge of economics to
She's got a
enjoy
really cute,
everything she
got a
has
really
to
cool
say.
dog. I don't know if
Yeah, fluffy dog, but
fluffy
the
dog.
big fluffy dog, not a little
Yes.
Pomeranian.
Yes.
It's like a supersized Pomeranian.
It's great.
Okay. And
Ozzy.
now, Ozzy, yeah, Ozzy's the name. Now I'm going to read you Mark Twain. All right, here it is. It ain't what you know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And that's actually the quote that Stephanie starts her book, The Deficit Myth, with. But it's so important. And I really hope that this podcast is something that helps everybody understand the things that are kind of hammered into our brains in the news, just telling you things without explaining the thinking and reasoning behind them about how our economy and monetary system works. We've been told a lot of lies. A lot of economics, as commonly told, is just fairy tales. And there's a lot of power in understanding how the system works and what is true and what is not. You will understand the news differently and your life differently, and make better decisions when it comes to electoral politics, have important conversations with your family about it. So yeah, I hope one day you'll reflect on that quote and be like, wow, many things will come to your mind that you once thought were very true that just are not so.
I agree. I think if you have an inkling of um, empathy and compassion and desire to want to create a better society, as many of us kind of see, a lot of things are in crisis right now, from the environment to just people having severe mental health problems. I just started the show Breaking Bad. I'm like 10 years too late, but it's like really interesting to see this piece of media kind of give us this window into the pain that people feel through a lack of healthcare. And there are so many different things that everyday people are missing in their lives and forced to kind of compete for in really ridiculous ways. And so I think many of us, and many people out there, have the desire to do things differently, want a different, like a fundamentally different kind of world, different kind of country, everything, all the different perspectives, right? But we keep getting told that it's impossible because these economic priests of the orthodoxy say, no, that will be against the law of, I don't know, whatever the hell. And
Our Bible, the
yes, and
microeconomics textbook.
exactly. And then they'll give us some ridiculous equation that nobody understands that has like nothing to do with the real world. So I am excited to break this stuff down, to move away from this notion that what we call the economy is just like the product of a bunch of individuals as ping pong balls, following these laws of nature. But in fact, there's all this nuance and complexity to it. It has to do with our values. It has to do with power. It has to do with the kind of world that we want. And really, like, the full potential of the human mind to be creative, to work together, to be cooperative. There's so many different ways to look at this. So that's what we're really going to be trying to get to. Those are our hopes and dreams. But
Yeah.
before we kind of log off here, Ka, tell us, how did you get to this place? How did we kind of come here together to create Funny Money, the podcast?
It's a
What's your
good
origin story?
question.
What's your villain origin story?
Oh, it's a good one. A lot of people do many great things out of spite. No, what you said about Breaking Bad really resonates. I'm notoriously not somebody who watches movies and TV shows, but I was picking up what you were putting down about the healthcare. I think just growing up, working class, and in a place where there was a lot of economic inequality, I always wore my class on my face, right? I had fucked up teeth, and you knew that, okay, her family can't afford dental care. When you saw me, because there were brown spots on my front two teeth growing up. And, you could tell because I took the LEAP bus and the clothes I wore and all this stuff. And a lot of the kids who kind of looked like me were upper class, right? The white kids were very upper class. And so just seeing that play out and never really feeling like I had a place where I fully fit in, I was always questioning, like, why is stuff like this? Why is the world like this? This isn't right. Like, this isn't conducive for people being happy. Those are probably not the words that 11-year-old me would have used, but I knew something was up, right? And so I think realizing that it would have been hard for me to pursue my passions and full creativity. And like when I was a kid, I wanted to do music. And then realizing everybody in my family saying, you can't do that. You can't make money doing that. You'll never make it out of this kind of way of life that we all have. And so I
Mhm.
struggled really hard to go to college, got really lucky to go, was the first in my family to go, and kind of realized there, after studying political science, thinking I would do law school to make money one day, hopefully. I was like, oh, these systems were designed to keep people like me in this situation. And
Mhm.
so once I got a taste of that, I just kept absorbing and learning and ended up going to graduate school to study this stuff. And then I was like, I got to tell everybody. So since then, that's been the goal and the mission. And so this podcast is perfect for us doing that. And I feel like the word podcast has a negative connotation. Podcast pejorative. But no, us being able to talk to many people about this is huge. We found each other on the internet after I started making TikToks in pursuit of this mission.
Love it. Great story. Yeah.
What's yours? Would you tell it
Mine.
now?
Sure. I
You
arrived to the
belay
United
it.
States. Yes, I got here from another country, Colombia, spelled with an O, not a U. And that really influenced like me understanding from early on that I was from another place and I was different. I think starting to visit my country of origin and see the differences in like standards of living and different levels of poverty made me just think like why is it like this? Why are some countries poor and some are not? And I've never been happy with the answers to that from your kind of standard economist, because I think that there's a lot more there that says about like the potential of all people to you know do wonderful things, to produce, to be creative, but just so many people never get the opportunity to because they're excluded from fundamental resources and experiences that we need to thrive. And sure, there are exceptions here and there, but like I really hate that argument that some people try to justify like extreme inequality because they know a guy who knows a guy who has an uncle that became rich or something. Because like that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about what people as communities experience, and that kind of hits really close to home for me. Living here in the United States, I had a family that was like very invested in education and like philosophy and science and history, and so I was kind of a nerd and still am. And that led me to really care about some of these issues, but want to try to understand them as something that can be shared with others. That's something about our own like growth and development. Everybody, it's really in vogue to talk about personal development and whatnot. But just like thinking about improving the world, uh, fighting for better policies, fighting for a different, more inclusive communities, fighting to end extreme poverty and poverty in general. All these things I think are very transformational, both like on an individual and collective level. It also helped that when I arrived in the U.S., the story of Dr. King and the civil rights movement was one of the first things I learned in school that I felt I really resonated with, and something kind of switched in my mind after that. So since then, I've been pursuing academic goals and whatnot. I've done that whole song and dance. And I found myself in 2018 working for a friend who ended up becoming a congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. And, here I am now, still trying to make my little contribution.
It's good that we have an outside perspective from you, having come to the United States, not having been born here. It's a little bit of an outsider perspective that you have, which I think is really valuable because we're blinded by propaganda. I don't know. I was one of those people who believed I was a temporarily inconvenienced millionaire, right? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, work super hard. But then you find out that we're deprived of having nice things and we can actually have nice things. And I think many people care very deeply about when they see someone who is homeless, when they see someone, who is dealing with houselessness, who is struggling, and they feel like, okay, I want to be able to do something for you, but there's so much struggle. There's so much poverty. There's so much suffering. And the idea that there's so much of it is overwhelming. I think most people are people who care so much to the point of knowing for their own mental health's sake, they have to tune out sometimes. But once you know that we can have nice things and there are some answers to these questions, life becomes a little bit easier and better. So hopefully this podcast can bring that for some people. I know that's improved my life a lot, but I think, this is for the people who are up at night wondering why shit is the way it is, why shit is bad, what can we do to make it better? People who are curious and people who care. That's really it. You don't need to be a nerd. You don't need to be any kind of person.
Right. I think that's what it all comes down to. We all have a role to play in different ways, but I think the thing that we have in common is that we care. So that's kind of cool.
And I think that's beautiful. All right.
All right. That's it.
That's it. That's the whole thing. We're so excited to do this. Thanks for being here.
And we will see you next time.
And you can find us on YouTube, where you should subscribe to watch us and listen to us. And it's at Pod Funny Money on social media. Twitch is where we will be live as well, if you prefer that mode of media.
Follow our Twitter as Twitter collapses under the rule of an authoritarian. Follow us on social media.
Dance with us as we have smoldering Twitter around